You might get away with doing these things in the US, but definitely don't do these things when you come to Germany. Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our baby, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. If we ask someone on the street in the US for stereotypes about Germany, what is the number one thing that we're probably going to get? Schmetterling! Yeah, this is something I recently talked about in a video about how Germans are often perceived as being angry because of stereotypes about their language, even though basically every language would give this impression if it was always shown being yelled. Or Germans are considered one of the rudest people to foreigners, but actually they may not truly be rude, just their cultural norms are different and misinterpreted. However, today, I want to talk about the opposite of this because I don't want to give the impression that it's just Germans who have different cultural norms that give them a bad rap when they aren't understood. Namely, there are things that we've picked up on in the 4.5 years that we've lived in Germany that Americans regularly do that in Germany is considered very rude. But there are also things that we've picked up on that Germans think Americans do that are rude, but actually, it's something that Americans don't do. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today in my video. Don't be rude, just act German, dude. So let's talk about this shouting German angrily and thus Germans being perceived as angry and rude, because actually this is something that Americans also suffer from, just in a different way. When Germans think of a stereotypical American, one of the first things they will also mention is how loud Americans are. And trust me when I say this isn't something that Germans mention lovingly. Rather, this is something that most of Germany will find very rude when they're sitting on a train with American tourists who can't seem to match the volume of their fellow native train travelers. One blogger put it this way: our volume is rooted in our culture's emphasis on individualism and assertiveness. Growing up, we are taught to be proud and confident, encouraged to make our voices heard, stand our ground, and take center stage. It's not that Americans are perceived as angry and rude because of how our language sounds when it is shouted. It is that we are considered rude simply because we are perceived as shouting when we talk. So how do Germans sound when they talk? Well, Germany isn't a library where everybody is whispering and shushing each other when somebody else raises their voice a few too many decibels, and Germans aren't church mice barely making a peep. Germans can also get nice and loud when they are sitting at their Stammtisch at the local Kneipe, but there generally is an audible step down in volume when two Germans are casually talking versus when two Americans are casually talking. And when you've lived in Germany for a period, you quickly learn that one of the quickest ways to get on a German's bad side is by creating too much unnecessary noise in their opinion. Whether it be by trying to mow your lawn outside of the specific time windows you're allowed to do so, using a car wash on Sundays, or talking too loudly, they won't look at you too kindly. In a recent video, I talked about the difference in frequency in which Germans and Americans smile. I presented data that showed how Germans generally laugh and smile less often than Americans, and how this is a cultural difference that often leads to two different perceptions of the opposite culture. One, it leads many Americans to believe that Germans are cold and rude because they don't smile as much as Americans would like.
Oh. A frowny face stamp. I didn't know they made those.
I had to special order it from Germany.
And on the flip side, this leads Germans to perceive Americans as fake or superficial because they smile too much according to them, which in turn can be perceived as rude as well. But smiling and laughing isn't the only things that Americans do that is misinterpreted as rude or specifically superficial and fake. Also, there's a big cultural misunderstanding in a particular phrase that is considered rude in Germany when Americans say it, and that is, how are you? At surface level, one might look at that phrase simply and say, how on earth can it be considered rude to inquire how someone is? Well, that's because of the cultural difference in how this phrase is used in both Germany and American cultures. I can't begin to describe the number of times I have heard Germans complain about how some Americans asked them how they were doing, but when they gave their answer, the Americans seemed disinterested or confused as to why the German was actually telling them how they were doing, or worse yet, the American walked away without waiting for the answer. And that's because when Germans ask you how you are doing, that phrase is meant very literally and they truly want an answer. But in the US, this isn't the case. In the US, how are you depends on the social setting and context as to how it should be translated into German. But the most common translation into German for this phrase is actually just hallo. Now, confusingly, Americans will generally respond with good, how are you? And then that will be answered with a good. And again, it seems like they are actually asking each other how they are and responding with telling the other how they are, but that is not what is happening. The International Students Office at MIT explained it like this. The question, how are you, or how's it going, just simply means hello, and it is meant as a greeting. There is no expectation for an answer. In fact, it would be odd if someone were to say anything more than just good or fine. Don't take it personally. The person who really wants to know how you are doing will still greet you in the same way, but they will also follow up with, so, how are you doing? And actually pause for an answer. As I've been learning German and of course speaking it out and about as we have been living in Germany, I have to admit one of the hardest things for me to learn along with the grammar, pronunciation, and genders of nouns has been the social rules when speaking German. Specifically when to use du and when to use Sie. For those of you that maybe aren't familiar, in German, you have a formal and informal way of addressing someone when you are saying you. You have the informal du that is used with, say, family or friends as a couple of examples. Then you have Sie, which is more formal and used with people you don't know, or when you're addressing police officers, for example. Or another way of looking at it could be you use du when you're on first name basis with people and Sie when you aren't. But one thing that makes this so hard for me is because of an American cultural norm I'm used to that is considered rude in Germany, and that is being on first name basis with everybody. Americans generally address one another verbally by the first name alone. In formal and professional situations, people may use a person's title, examples Mr., Mrs., Miss, Doctor, etc., followed by their family name. As a general rule that I have found, Americans are much more comfortable with using first names and talking informally than Germans. For example, in offices or businesses, I hear Germans using titles and family names, where in the US, it has become much more common to use simply first names, irregardless of who is talking to who, title, age, education, etc. As goes our social world, so too goes the workplace. Addressing people by their first names is now the norm in corporate America. Now in Germany, this is going to vary from office culture to office culture, where some businesses might be moving to first names, or some might use first names when customers aren't around, but when customers are present, they will switch back to speaking to each other more formally. But also, when someone on the street stops someone else to ask for directions, for example, they will address each other formally because they don't know each other, whereas in the US, there isn't really any formality afforded to each other generally. Now, yes, being too informal with someone you don't know in Germany can be considered rude, but I do want to let Americans off the hook and say, don't really worry about this too much. Most Germans I have come across are very forgiving with this, especially if you are trying to speak German and can't decide between du or Sie. Something that often gets a bad rep in Germany is how Germans are. By that, I mean they are often portrayed as cold, rude, or too direct. Look, I've talked often about how there are sometimes bits of truth in stereotypes, but often stereotypes are exaggerated and should be taken with a grain of salt. However, I will say that Germans definitely are significantly more direct than Americans, and in some ways, even I have found this is a possible con to life in Germany coming from my American cultural norms. But today, I want to talk about how the flip side of this is how rude Americans are perceived for being indirect. So, for example, make a plan with an American and you will spend half the time discussing what you want to do, or too much thought will be given to not wanting to step on the toes by saying what you actually want to do, and you end up doing something that you don't want to do.
We were just about to grab dinner. You guys want to join us?
What's that?
I said, you guys want to go to dinner?
How's that?
If you guys don't want to, it's fine.
No.
Are you saying no?
You know what? Sure, why not?
All right, great. We'll meet you
Yeah.
out front, 15, I'll drive.
Or you will ask someone directly if they want to do something and they will respond with a maybe, as they don't want to commit to something, or maybe they don't really want to do something but they don't have a good excuse to get out of it yet, and for some reason in many parts of American culture it isn't acceptable to just say, actually I don't want to do that, without thinking that you will offend someone. For our German friends though, they will just straight up tell you, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. And for a German, because of this cultural difference, it is viewed as very rude and inconsiderate to who you are talking to if you are indirect because you are not valuing their time. What I've learned is that Germans are more offended by the indirectness than what Americans are afraid of, which is offending them by just being honest. Along these lines, another thing common for Americans but rude in Germany is saying, we should get together soon, but never actually having any intentions of getting together, or at the very least getting together soon. For a German, if you say, hey, we should grab a coffee soon, or let's get lunch sometime, or something vague like this, they will take it very literally and will expect to make those plans with you right then. Whereas for an American, they never actually intend to make those plans. This is just a friendly gesture and a way to say, hey, I like you. For Americans, since this is built into our culture, we know the difference between a real invite for a hangout and the what seems like an invitation but actually is just saying, I like you. If an American actually intends to make plans, it will be very specific, like, hey, would you want to grab a coffee next Saturday in the afternoon? Whereas if they are just wanting to express they enjoyed talking with you, they will say something like, let's grab coffee sometime. For me personally, if someone doesn't say something like a vague, let's do something sometime after talking, it can feel like we made no connection and we want the relationship to end after that conversation. And although I know that vague invite may never happen, it still feels like a connection was made and that the person enjoyed speaking with me enough that getting together sometime again to talk could possibly be in the cards, even if it isn't immediately intended to happen. So what about these things that Germans think Americans do that is really rude, but Americans don't actually do? Well, we've met many Germans who have never been to the US, so their entire perception of American cultural norms is based on TV and movies. This has led us to be surprised by some things Germans find very rude about American culture and have brought up to us as problematic for them that isn't actually a part of American culture. One of these things is how in movies and TV shows, nobody ever says goodbye when they're on the phone. They just simply hang up. Have you guys ever noticed this?
20 minutes? Fine. Okay, 463.
You just let me know if you're gonna leave town.
Okay?
Okay.
Yes, I understand.
Well, guys, Hollywood has led you astray here. The main reason for not saying goodbye in entertainment is simple. Time management. When it comes to the script's length, we have to turn in a cut to the network, let's say 22 minutes. They won't accept 22 minutes and 30 seconds. If I cut the guy saying goodbye, maybe I get to keep my favorite joke. Eventually, you get to the point where you're not even writing goodbye into the script, knowing from experience that you're just going to cut that later. But that's not the only thing Hollywood has led Germans astray on. One of the most common complaints about American culture we get from Germans is how Americans wear street shoes in the house, but even worse than that, also have them on the couch or on a bed. And this really grinds Germans' gears. But wait, this is actually a little bit complicated. Let me try and explain, because honestly, I still don't understand the German way. One thing we see in German homes that we hadn't seen as a staple in American homes are shoe racks and benches directly inside the front door of a home. These are there because, generally speaking, Germans take their shoes off when they go in the home and leave them by the door. When we go over to a German friend's house, we also take our shoes off at the door, and some homes will even have slippers for guests right there to slip on. However, this isn't necessarily an American habit, and in fact, Hollywood probably generally does accurately portray to Germans as horror how Americans do wear street shoes around inside their homes. However, here are where we have some issues understanding the difference. At least I do. First off, when you see this in Hollywood flicks, I would say now they're taking it too far. Generally, yes, Americans wear shoes in the home, but putting shoes on furniture is very frowned upon in most cases and is also considered rude behavior in the US. So okay, I think Americans and Germans agree that shoes shouldn't be on furniture, but we've established wearing shoes in a home is considered gross in Germany, but generally acceptable in the US. Because of this, I have felt like it is rude to wear shoes in a German's home, especially since some do have slippers for guests. But then there are times where I go to a German's home and they tell me to leave my shoes on, and I don't know if this is because they are trying to make me feel comfortable, as they know Americans typically wear shoes on in homes, or if they really take their shoes off in their homes, but they want guests to leave their shoes on. So Germans, what do you do when you are a guest in someone's home? Leave shoes on or take them off? Or is this house to house different? To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is video gaming really a sport? Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video. So Germans, what do you do when you're a guest in someone's home? So Germans, what do you do when you are a guest in So Germans, what do you do when you are a guest? You might get away with doing these things, but considered